Oh, hey dude. Welcome in everybody. Thanks for joining me for today's video, of which we're going to be speculating about the potential of the Elden Ring Tarnished Edition. To do so, we're going to be taking a look at From Software's most recent title, Elden Ring Nightreign. Nightreign has a ton of brand new systems, as well as countless refinements to the overall formula that we've come to know and love. So, let's let the speculation run wild, shall we? The next segment that we're gonna go over, I guess, dude, is, we'll head on over to the training room, dude. The combat area, dude. So, a couple of things here. We'll probably go over this first. So, this is something, if we're talking about improvements that they could potentially make to the Tarnished Edition, this is like number one on the docket for me. Like, adding in a third-person ADS, aim down sight, you know, for ranged weapons, you know, particularly bows, great bows, everything in between, even crossbows, right? So that is a massive, massive improvement to the overall, like, ranged gameplay style, right? Like, being able to actually see your character manually aim like this is so much better than how the aiming system is in the base game currently, you know? And I think that this would be a, once again, a no-brainer inclusion as it relates to just the overall engagement with the particular system of aiming down sight with bows and ranged weapons, because it's been a massive headache for so long, dude, you know. I believe we've had that aiming system since conception, right? Like, I think Demon Souls had that. I can't remember if Demon Souls had aiming down sight or not. It might have been Dark Souls 1 that actually implemented that, but either way, dude, you know, it's kind of sad that it took them this long to just be like, oh yeah, players would probably want a third-person ADS instead of a first-person in a third-person, you know, action-oriented experience, right? So, this would be a big one, you know. And actually, I'm gonna check something on the fly here, because I never actually checked if they gave crossbows the same treatment in relation to that. I believe they did. But yeah, dude, like, look at how clean that shit looks, man. Like, that's fucking sick, dude, right? And, like, is that the case with great bows too? Let me just look. Yes, it is. So yeah, dude, like, this is just, it's so much better as a system than the first-person ADS, right? So, I also wanted to make sure to showcase the third-person aiming down sight with the ballista, so here is that. And of course, this not only applies to this one, but it also applies to the jar cannon as well. And I think this leads us into an additional discussion too, that being, of course, that there is a lot of really cool additions that they made in Nightreign to bows and great bows. So yeah, let's just take a look at this. So, one of the main things that's kind of cumbersome in the base game of ER currently is if you have a bow in your main hand or your offhand, right, they make you two-hand it always before you can fire off a shot. And one of the great, I guess, innovations that they made, you know, is they allowed you to just fire shots without having to first two-hand the bow. You can just be weaving, you know, melee attacks and then just go straight into, you know, firing a shot without having to have that arbitrary, like, gap in action, right? To be able to run things like offhand bow and just, you know, like, be like running like a straight sword or something, you know, you're weaving back and forth and then you just fire off a pot shot here and there. Like, that's so fucking cool, dude, you know? Like, oh, I gotta disengage here. Let's fire off a few shots from range. and then go from there. And of course, that applies to great bows as well, right? So it's like not having to two-hand the great bow first, and just like running offhand great bow would actually be something that you could do, you know? And just even not only what it would mean from a PvP standpoint, but like even in PvE, dude, you know, being able to just weave both of these things seamlessly together, like, and the types of builds that you could put together through that, you know, just the ease of use, you know, and it's effectively falls under that same line of quality of life improvements, which I think is just, it's just great. You should definitely try to prioritize those things as much as possible. I think that wraps up that segment with a nice, neat bow, so to speak, dude. But moving on to the next portion of the video, we're going to be talking about what bows have and what From Software gave them in Dark Souls 3, I do believe, is the ability to do augmented attacks with the animations on bows, which, like you can see here, the sprinting attack, the sprint shot, backstep shot, the rolling attack. Obviously on Guardian he has a little bit of a sidestep dash, but the same rules still apply there, right? This never got applied to crossbows, unfortunately. And crossbows have always been leagues behind pretty much bows in every single iteration From Software's games. I mean, hell, you go back to Demon Souls, and you couldn't even ADS with crossbows in Demon Souls, and you could with bows. So, crossbows really could use a lot of help, dude, you know? They could use a lot of iteration and improvement, and that's a big thing that I was really hoping for From Software to do in Nightreign, but unfortunately, they just kind of fell by the wayside again in terms of iteration-based improvements. So that's definitely something that I would really, really like to see, you know, is sprinting shots, rolling shot animations for crossbows and the like. I think that would be an excellent addition. And of course, too, the other thing is they did give them the ability to jump shot, right? Like, which was something, of course, that Elden Ring added, the jumping mechanic. And so they didn't forget about crossbows in that way, right? But unfortunately, they never saw fit to give them the sprinting or rolling attack animations, which I think would go a long ways as to helping them feel a lot better to engage with, you know? Speaking of crossbows, dude, if we go back to the main man, Marvelous Chester, back all the way in the Dark Souls 1 days, dude, like, look at the type of shit that he's doing, dude, you know? It's so fucking sick, dude. Like, I've always wanted, you know, this archetype fantasy to exist in From Software's games. You know, they put a character like Chester and he's doing fucking, you know, spin kicks and shit and throwing out rose petal throwing knives and, you know, like reloading his crossbow super quick and shit, dude. It's just, it's so badass, dude. This is what I want using a crossbow in a From Soft game to feel like. A couple other things I just wanted to showcase as to, you know, weaving the melee swings in with bow shots and stuff like that, especially when you have like main hand bow. You do something like this, and then you can go straight into like a sprinting shot, you know what I mean? Which is just, it's so cool, dude. Being able to chain and do things like this would just be absolutely incredible for like the pseudo ranged playstyle. And I think this is a great time to bring up one of the most unfortunate aspects of utilizing a bow, crossbow, ballista, or great bow in your offhand, which is you cannot do sprinting or rolling attack animations with them, and you can't even jump shot, which really, really sucks. That's something that I hope that From Software really goes back to the drawing board, like they did with Dark Souls 2, and look back at adding the mirrored main hand offhand functionality so that everything that you can do with your main hand you can also do with your offhand, because that was one of the greatest things about Dark Souls 2 was that you could do everything that your main hand could But in your offhand, you could do sprinting attacks when you had a, you know, weapon in your offhand. You could do rolling attacks with it. You could do everything, right? And that's one of my biggest copes, you know? That might even be another video in and of itself, but just really, really hoping that From Software, at the very least, even if it's not put forward into the Tarnished Edition, which fingers crossed on that front, but I think it's unlikely because it would be a shit ton of work for them to do to implement the mirrored main hand offhand functionality. But that aside, I want them to really, really, really look into that going forward for their future games, because it adds so much to the overall experience, you know? Because if I was able to do sprinting attacks, you know, with the bow when it's in my offhand, like I can here, you know, whilst having the same full functionality of, you know, my main hand melee weapon, being able to do running R2s, jumping R1s, you know, all sorts of jumping attacks, all of the augmented attack animations instead of just the neutral stuff, it would be absolutely exceptional. And a lot of what I'm talking about too, I would hope, gets applied to the magic systems and things of that nature as well, going forward into future games. So, one of the main things that a lot of people tend to talk about, right, is how they gave Ironeye basically like a 4-hit combo, right, with firing arrows. 1, 2, 3, and then 4. And then there's a stopgap, there's a break there, right, because the 4th one is technically counting as a melee weapon chain finisher there, right? So that's very interesting, and it's a very, very cool addition, right? Having ranged weapons actually follow like a combo cadence instead of just repeating the exact same animation over and over and over again, like they pretty much always have. And I don't believe any other From Software game has implemented a sequential-based attack chain system applied to ranged weapons, outside of what we see with the Smith's Script dagger added in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. Barring that, we've seen sparse few improvements, and I think there's a lot more potential going forward. So they do have ranged combos for the ranged weapons, that being bows, specifically on Ironeye, but the other cool thing that they actually did was that applies to just everybody using a bow with the baseline firing of it too. So it's like 1, 2, 3, and then 4, right? You can even see the different animations that play therein. So it's like, instead of it just replaying the exact same one over and over again like it does currently in the base game, I think adding these ranged, you know, combos for bows would be really fucking cool. And then you could even pair that with, you know, like the Twin Blade Talisman, for example, in the base game, that gives the chain finisher I think it's around like a 45% damage increase, right? So like having these ranged weapons, you know, function off of a combo-based structure would allow for a lot more build expression in that way too, which I think is very, very cool. And like I was just saying, this not only applies to just baseline short bows, long bows, but it also applies to great bows as well, as you can see here. So if you just do that, right, that's the 2-hit combo, right? So, you know, once again, pairing it with like the Twin Blade Talisman for the chain finishers, it's like, great bow build, let's go, dude, buff, let's go. So yeah, like having it focus on this, once again, this combo-based structure, I think is very, very cool. And obviously, there's a little bit of a difference with how Nightreign has it set up in comparison to the base game too, because as you can see here, so if I press R2, this allows me to basically hold the arrow just like an R1 press or an R2 press would do in the base game right now. So you still have the holdable functionality with the R2 button. Obviously, being able to fire 2 different arrow types, you know, with the R1 and R2 buttons respectively, is why there's a little bit of a difference here. But I think that giving up the capability to shoot an additional ammo type on the fly would be more than worth it if it would result in us getting additional functionality and, more importantly, more agency over said ranged weapon, which I think leads us into the next section of the video perfectly. What's also very cool about like how they designed Ironeye, right, is this, you know, like, and like giving him an R2 cancel, you know what I mean? Like with the heavy attack, and you know, like shooting 3 arrows in a spread. This kind of goes towards just making ranged weapons and shit like that feel like a complete weapon all of their own, you know? Because a lot of times, especially like early on in like the Dark Souls 1 days and Dark Souls 2 and Demon Souls even, and stuff like that, and obviously the first iteration of like giving bows sprinting attacks and rolling attacks and stuff like that we saw in Dark Souls 3 and in Bloodborne as well. And obviously, you know, the sprinting, jumping attacks, things like that are there in Elden Ring, but I think, you know, the addition of things like this, you know, like having a unique heavy attack that consumes 3 arrows, you know, and like a spread like that as its R2 instead of just having the R2 button have a different, like, ammo type, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm firing with fire arrows now, I'm firing with poison arrows. I think, you know, there's something more that's gained here with, like, this, you know? Like, utilizing the R2 button for an R2 cancel and, like, a spread shot and things of that nature. You know, leaning more into the full moveset, having a ranged weapon feel like a full, complete melee weapon does, is something that we could potentially see in the Tarnished Edition as well, right? So, and not to mention future games, especially in things like Duskbloods, because I think a lot of the character-centric designs with like the active abilities and the ultimate abilities and stuff like that is going to be something that we definitely see explored again in Duskbloods, but that's a topic for another time, dude. Some additional points that I wanted to mention in relation to Ironeye's overall moveset and just the ranged weapon discussion in its entirety is when you have the R2 button freed up as an additional input, instead of it just being relegated to specifically swapping ammo types, right? You can do all sorts of crazy shit, like we've already touched on with the R2 cancel and the spread shot R2, things of that nature, being able to hold the input like you can here. If you extrapolate that same idea and mechanical framework into something like a great bow, for example, you could actually re-implement a system that From Software has really only played around with, I think, in Bloodborne with Simon's Bowblade. And that actually did have the ability to do a fully charged shot with additional damage, and it took a little bit longer to draw, but it gave you that benefit as a result. And you could do something very similar with the R2 input, you know, being freed up instead of just being an additional ammo type for great bows. And I think that that would give them a niche, which, I mean, come on, dude, it's a fucking great bow. It's a, you know, it's a massive, heavy bow, dude. That's kind of what the whole fantasy should be, is just being able to do, you know, like huge, bulky charge shots, you know, for massive amounts of damage and stuff. And that way, it wouldn't be just solely tied to the Ash of War with like through and through and some of the other bow Ashes of War that we've seen, you know, for great bows and for normal bows alike. And obviously you could do something very similar with ballistas, right? So the jar cannon and the hand ballista. So yeah, dude, you know, there's a lot that they could do. And I think they should, given the opportunity. So, as it turns out, dude, and I nearly missed this. This was just something that I figured out going back and grabbing a few extra clips here and there while recording. I actually found out that what I was talking about for great bows, you know, and what I mentioned about Simon's Bowblade in Bloodborne, with the charged shot, which we've never really seen From Software play around with, turns out, in Nightreign, they didn't just give the R2 unique property to Ironeye. In fact, Ironeye's unique R2 capabilities are delegated just to him. But what's very fascinating is I found this out with every other character, when you press the R2 button, you get a unique heavy attack for the bow. And not only that, but you have the ability to just, with the buffered press, it's an uncharged R2 shot, and it also has a follow-up heavy attack input, and each one has, it counts as basically, you know, a combo, like similar to what I talked about earlier in the video with having the R1s be a chain finisher, right? Having basically like a 4-hit combo chain associated. And not only did they give unique heavy attack animations to the bows, but that also functions as a combo as well, with the second attack acting as the chain finisher. And then it gets even crazier, dude. We're not done yet. You actually have the ability to charge said R2 to actually get significantly more damage out of each individual R2 if you have the time to charge the shot and get that off without getting hit, of course. So this is just the uncharged, right? So 66 and then 70. And then you'll probably, if you have a keen enough eye, you can see the difference in the animation. So here's the fully held, right? And that's 76, so you get more damage there. And then I'll show you the fully charged secondary, right? You can see him putting more effort into the drawback until, you know, the elbow locks into place right there at the end of the animation. So it's like, dude, this is exactly what I'm talking about, dude. You know, what I was just talking about with the great bows and what they could do with like a charge shot and stuff. And lo and behold, this was something that I wasn't even aware of, you know. Even though I was making a video talking about, you know, all of the ranged weapon advancements that they've made, this completely, you know, just came out of left field. I did not know that they had given a, like, basically stance-based R2 attack for all of the baseline bows, the short bows and the long bows, respectively, right? So, just absolutely incredible iterative advancements, you know, placed on bows all around when it comes to Nightreign, dude. Like, the treatment that bows have gotten in Nightreign is, man, it's absolutely exceptional. And like, I want this same level of treatment placed on, you know, everything else that I've talked about in the video thus far. I want, you know, like, I want crossbows to have the, you know, augmented sprinting based attacks and rolling attacks that bows do, you know, like, I want it all, dude, you know, just pull out all the stops, dude, and tie everything up with a nice, neat bow, dude. So, with that being said, my friends, thank you so much for joining me on this, what I would describe as a beautiful rant about ranged weapon design and ranged weapons in Nightreign. Hopefully we get to see some of this stuff in the Tarnished Edition, but if not, then so be it, dude. But with that out of the way, dude, if you guys enjoyed your time, I'd really, really appreciate it if you'd share the video with a homie, drop a like, and of course, if you're feeling extra special, dude, feel free to subscribe. There's lots more content like this in the pipeline and beyond, dude. Take care of yourselves, guys. Bye for now, y'all.